All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming to the workshop today. So the topic here is that we're going to talk about kind of this anime style 3D character that I put together, and I want to just talk about a little bit about how anime style 3D models kind of work and some of the techniques that go into them. And also, so our goal today will be to try to put together. We won't do a 3D modeling. This is not a 3D modeling session. But we will use a 3D model and we will use Blender to configure shaders or textures, etc., to get that to work. And then we will spend time getting to put the shaders together as well. So my name is Jesse. You have the privilege to call me by my first name because I'm in person. But I go by the alias CoderNunk. Has anybody here, just a show of hands, has seen my YouTube channel?
Sounds familiar.
Okay. Yeah, so I do a lot of shorts, but I also made an hour-and-a-half long video. It talks about a very similar thing. Shameless plug, I know, but I figured the context would probably be good. Anyway, so what I'm going to start with the workshop is just a little bit of presentation, just to get a little context into what we're doing, and then we will continue to work step by step through some of the process. So raise your hand or just call out if you have any questions. It doesn't have to be formal. Just let me know. So starting off here, who here is a fan of anime? Aha, nice. Anybody recognize this character? He's actually one of my new favorite shows. He's from Solo Leveling, recent show came out. Anyway, but let's talk about what makes anime appealing. Why would anime be a thing we want in our video games? It's personally, I think what's really appealing on anime is just the large amount of expression, the really cool art, the colors. There's a variety of things here. Exaggerations. I think more realistic styles don't have that ability to exaggerate and show emotion as well. But also, basic cartoons do, but they also aren't as pretty, I guess you could say. So it allows for a very broad range of expression and storytelling. So it's a very, that's how it appeals to me. Does anybody else want to say how anime appeals to them?
Very thin lines.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also a lot of variety of art styles in anime too. So you might see this, but there's so many different ones. There's a lot of freedom of expression. So I think another thing to understand is as practitioners, as some artists or game developers, if we're thinking about adapting the anime style, what defines the anime look, right? So there's a few key components to this. There's obviously the exaggeration of features, like the eyes, much pointier, sometimes, depends on the character you're trying to make. But notice the shadows here too. There's not a lot of contours in the shadows. There's really just kind of three main tones. There's the main skin tone, there's the really dark tone, and the shadow tone. You have a little bit of flexibility in how much you want to do the shadows, but typically what you see is just a very hard cut on shadows. There's no blending as much, per se. And then also just very, vivid colors. It also depends on the tone, too. There's a lot more somber animes, but there's also some very, bright, expressive ones, too. These cutoffs of the shadows here, this is a term referred to as cell shading, so you may have heard that term before. Next, this is not really a Godot presentation without talking about video games, right? So we talk about what makes anime appealing. What makes video games appealing, right? So one of the things that you can get out of a video game that you cannot get out of any other form of entertainment is player agency. Whenever you play a game, you choose what your character does. And depending on the way the game's programmed, it can very well be a huge deciding factor in what happens next. So it's a very important thing to keep in mind with how we engage with video games. Of course, video games are also engaging for other reasons. Lots of engaging game mechanics, like who doesn't love leveling up in an RPG? Collecting stuff is always fun. Beating up enemies. Becoming the character you play, and in multiplayer is also some aspects. Anybody else want to share what makes video games appealing? I think we all know, so no problem. All right, so we talked about anime. We talked about video games. What about combining the two, right? What if we combine them together? It's like you get, I would say, probably a wide range of expression, right? Good fantasy storytelling, and the hand-drawn look would look really cool, right? So it's there's a lot of reasons why a studio may want to adopt an anime style for their video game. This is Arc System Works. They developed Guilty Gear in the Blaze Blue series. They've done a lot of work to pioneer the style in video games, and they use the style pretty prolifically. We'll talk about them more later. However, it's not quite as straightforward as you might think, right? So when you're drawing anime, you typically are making static images and running them together in a series. In a video game, however, you need to account for variable animations. Your camera is going to be variable as well. So you have to account for different angles of the camera. You got to account for different positions your character's in, different animations, character reactions to things. Yeah, you could draw those couple frames in an anime, which I'm not saying is easy, by the way, but it's a different type of discipline. It's just harder to account for all those combinations of factors in a video game. So even though there are plenty of games that have 2D drawn sprites like Blaze Blue, it's not quite as feasible to do for most video game developers. So the solution to that would be 3D models. So 3D gives us a lot more flexibility and expression. And the reason for that is because a 3D model is built in 3D space, so you can do the camera anywhere. You can also leverage 3D models rigs for animations. And it's much easier to port animations between characters if they have a very similar rig structure. So 3D is just a really important tool in our toolkit that we can use to, as game developers. Now, not all games are going to want to go with the 3D aesthetic, but we can do stuff to make it feel more 2D, and while getting the benefits of 3D. Any questions so far? Oops. Crap. But is it possible to sell the anime look with 3D? It is. Now let's talk about how this is possible, and this is basically the entirety of the presentation. So I mentioned Arc System Works before. They put together a really good game developers conference talk back 10 years ago, and they talked about the various different things that they had to do to break conventions of 3D to make it look 2D. We will talk about the various different terminology here, such as normals and UV mapping. So don't worry too much about what they are here. We'll get into that later. But basically, we're going to use 3D, but we're also going to bend the rules a little bit too. And that's how we'll be able to achieve a look. Just a couple of things to note with stylized 3D models is you might see something like this abomination. I mean, not the artwork, but just the topology is a little bit scary to look at. But but there is a reason for it. So you can have a variety of different topology structures, but because you're not really doing a realistic or kind of normal 3D model, you have the freedom to do things like this. And it can still look good. The reason this is designed the way it is because her lips could go all the way up here, her mouth, right? So you could get this huge expression range, right? It's much harder to do it on a traditional 3D topology structure. But you don't necessarily have to do this. And I'll show you that mine's not this way either. But it really depends on kind of how you want to adapt the style. But I just want to illustrate that this is possible. And you might see this in your journey. If you continue to work with the style, you'll probably see a lot of this. So it's nothing to really be intimidated by. It's just that there is a reason for it. And then because we're using a very flat shaded structure, we don't need things like normal maps or bump maps or special textures like that. We do have our own set of texturing that we'll use, but since we're relying mostly on the clean kind of like flat shadow look, we can get away with some things that we don't necessarily need to do with other 3D characters modeling. And then before we get into kind of like the nitty-gritty, you might see different styles, such as like Guilty Gear style, which is meant to replicate anime, or you might see something like Genshin Impact, which is not exactly replicating anime, but it also has an aesthetic of anime. So what I'm just kind of trying to illustrate here is that we don't have to build it one-to-one with everything. We have flexibility to adapt our own art styles to this. You'll see that my character is much more simplified than either of these because I'm not a professional artist by any means. But I have spent some time working with the technical side of this, so I would like to at least share those things. That being said, is like the principles that you can learn from what Arc System Works has done and other studios have done to replicate the anime style can be applied in your own work, regardless of how much you want to look like one of these. All right, so now we could begin the workshop. So I think everyone here already has all the materials. Let me know if anybody has any trouble accessing the materials or anything like that. These are the versions of Blender and Godot we're using for the workshop. And I have some resource files here as well. Yes?
Would it be possible to quickly run through the Blender setup of add-ons and so on for people who might not have used it?
Yes, I will. Once we get to that point in the workshop, I'll show you how we can install the add-ons. Yes, no problem. Thank you for bringing it up. Yep. Just a couple of disclaimers in the workshop. I mentioned this a little bit briefly before. This is a character that I'm using for my game, which is really not developed very much yet, but this character, Kyla, is provided to you in the workshop files. Feel free to use her 3D model for the follow along with the workshop. I do have a Creative Commons license because I do plan to use this character in my game whenever I actually get around to making it kind of more official. But for educational purposes, please feel free. I also just saying that this is kind of what I was able to come up with, so it's clear not as detailed as the other characters I've shown. So I can't say that we're going to make this completely replicated anime, but I do want to emphasize some of the techniques that they may still be useful to you. Any questions? All right. So we're going to start off. With talking about the textures. So there's a couple of tricks that, and this is a trick that actually I've adopted from actually low poly models rather than anime models. I'll get into that in a second though, but if everyone has that character 0 file, it should be in a folder called 0 starting files. That's where we can start with. That will be the basic model. It really shouldn't have any of the stuff in it there. We could start with that file there. And I think in folder number 1, you'll see the base texture as well. So we'll get to that in a moment here. So actually, I'll go over this and then we'll go through setting up the texture. But you look at this and you're just like, this is just a bunch of colored squares. You know, how is this useful, right? But believe it or not, this thing is really powerful. This is called an atlas texture. And an atlas texture is really just colored squares. So you may see on other 3D models like these sophisticated UV maps, like you see like they unwrap and they're kind of like in this oval shape and they're all like on islands and like a big 4096 by 4096 texture. It's, you know, but if you're not really striving for a lot of detail and you're not going to paint anything on the model, this is excellent because this could be a very small texture. It's very easy. It simplifies your UV wrapping process so much. And it's like, it's also just a more efficient, it'll work more efficiently in your game because you're not loading large texture files. They're just very small ones. So when I was doing the work to make my 3D character, I kind of just ran into this solution because like when I tried painting, I couldn't get the look good. I just was having a lot of trouble with it. And I was like, you know what, since I'm more emphasis on the shadows and just kind of like the shapes and the colors, stuff like that, this worked great for me. So I'm going to show you this technique. It may not be applicable to everybody. You may find you want to do more traditional UV mapping. That's totally fine. But for the workshop, I'm going to share this technique, and we'll go through it together on how we can implement it. So this is kind of an example of how you might set up the Atlas texture. So I have a 32 by 32 pixel file in the folder number 1. It should be called grid.png. I'll walk through it as well. But basically, all this really is you will basically define a color palette of your character. So you can really use these for anything, but this is just how I chose to organize mine. So I have 2 different skin tones. There's the basic skin tone. This is for lips. You know, 2 tones for hair, like here's our main hair color. This is for eyebrows. You know, some colors for the clothing and other accessories. Some colors for the eyes. And then just some other extra colors. I think they use these for the boots. And then just a generic white and black palette is good too. If you find you need more, you can split. You can make more lines in. You could do it without the lines too. It's just a bit harder because if you're using the paint bucket tool in Blender, it might bleed into the other squares and it'll just make it a little bit harder to manage. So just having the colors here, the black outlines just makes it a little bit easier to use. So we're going to set this up first. That will be the first thing we're going to do. So let me go back. Okay, so you should have the Blender file. We're actually not going to go to this quite yet. Let's open up let me go here. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, it's probably because it's not full screen. Sorry. Okay. So in number 1, we got the Blender Atlas texture, and we got here's my character's base palette, and then you also have the grid palette, which is the one. So yeah, it's like extremely small, but yeah, so like here's the base palette. And here's the grid palette. So what we'll do is we'll edit this grid palette here. And then go over to Krita or any sort of image software you have. Paint will work just fine. Once you get your grid and your image editing software, just fill in a few colors. They don't have to be perfect. primarily what we want to do is just make sure we have something we can work with. Because once you're in Blender, it's easy enough to change the colors. It's just that's a little bit of pain to actually make the lines in Blender with the tools that it has. So it's just using your image editing software is just easier. So, I usually when I do this is like I might go online and I might find like skin tones. A bit along these lines. But it's but you can also borrow it from the base to the base skin tone. Then you can just use the color picker to get the thing, paste it in there. I imagine you could also find certain textures too if you don't have. But the way I made this, just to kind of show you, is this is right here, and then I did like the line tool here, got like a black, and then Krita has mirroring tools you can use as well. So just do in the center. X, make sure the size is like a pixel. So it's it is a tool. There's a way to do it. Huh? Yeah, that's what I'm actually looking for. There we go. Pixel brush. Go. And then you kind of edit it the best you can. If you're OCD like me, you try to get it perfect, but you don't necessarily need to. But yeah, that's basically kind of what you do with the groove texture. You can see that there's a little bit of but yeah, same idea, right? And then once you're in there, you just build the color that you like. And so on and so forth. Raise your hand if you're done with your texture atlas. Couple more minutes. Let me know if there's any questions. I can come around the room as well.
Could you show the unit again? It shows like what a square belongs to like what and like the scanner's eyes.
Oh yes, I can do that. There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't worry if you don't get the exact color palette that you want. We'll play around with the colors once we get everything linked up in Blender. Just want to have some colors filled that kind of make sense, and then we go from there. problem. And let me know if you need me to like give you more time. No problem. I'll move forward here. All right. So next is kind of the UV wrapping, but before we do that, we need to do a little bit of stuff. So now we can go and actually open Blender and look at stuff. So the fun part, right? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to set up a material on our model, which is, materials are really just contain shaders. It's like a configuration kind of object, but it contains a shader. And a shader can help define how your model reacts to light and things like that, colors, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to do a little bit of setup as well, just to make sure everything is ready to be rendered the way we want it to be. So we'll go ahead and go into Blender, and I'll show you that process. All right, so over here. All right, so you should have a file that looks something like this, in character 0. So we'll use the starting file, and we can start with that. I think we'll continue to work through that 0 file. Unless it gets stuck, you can open up one of the other folders when we get to that particular step. So here, we're going to go over to the shading tab in Blender. And we're going to go ahead and do a couple of configurations here. So over here is the type of rendering we want in our viewport. We can use a zero preview. And I'm just going to do scene lights and scene world. It's not that these options are bad per se. It's just that there's a little bit of background noise from the HDRI in the back, which is just like the skybox with also lighting information. So I like to just use the lights that's already provided in the file. It'll just make this a little bit more consistent for us to use. Then once you have that ready, go ahead and select the character. The model is all one object here. And we're going to create a new material. So she has no materials on right now. Go ahead and click the new material here and give it a name. I like to call it base. And once you have your base material, raise your hand. Looks like we're good. Please stop me if you guys run into any issues. I don't want to make this like part of the model. So. Next, there's this principle of BSDF here. This is not really necessary for our purpose. It's meant for more like traditional rendering. Since we're doing a non-photorealistic type of shader, we don't need this complexity. We can instead just kind of remove it. And then we'll add, we'll get into actually that a little bit. So we can remove that. And then what we're going to do is now we're going to do Shift A is the shortcut key to add. And then use the search option, look for image texture. Add that. And then you're going to have this option here. Since we made our texture externally, we will actually just open it. Click open and look for your texture. Click my base here, and you just plug it into here. So this is all fine and dandy, right? She's rendering as just a black shadow, right? So there's like nothing really here. So that's okay. This is expected because we haven't set up the rest yet. So once we get to this point, we now have this available to us, so we can at least start the next step. Raise your hand if you have a black colored character on your screen. All right. I'll give another couple minutes, and then we can move on to the UV part.
Can you show the part where you add really?
Yes. So if click on the character, you can either go to the right side here. Actually, no, I'll just.
Search.
Okay, here we go. So click on the character, and then there should be a new button here or on the right side here in your pane. There should be a material, it's like a red circle, red sphere. Click new, and then you'll get a new slot. Just call it base. You can do it over here as well. And then you can delete the first will be yeah. X is a shortcut for delete. You also use delete. Was that good or?
Service. Will you try that?
And just add Blender is a very shortcut heavy program. It's very helpful to know them, but if you don't know them, that's okay. You can find what you need for the most part with like right click or these menus above. Like the add node, you can do it this way. Should be texture, image texture right here as well. I've been using Blender for several years, so I've remembered most of the shortcut keys, but it's you don't necessarily have to know them to use Blender. It's just kind of more efficient, like as you use it more often. But for the sake of workshop, it's not. Don't be, don't worry if you don't know shortcut keys. I'll walk through the ones that I do use, but if there's any confusion there, I can show as well. Just let me know. Base. Are we all good? All right. We're going to move on to the next step. So we did this. So we set up that material so that we can actually see what colors we're mapping to for this step. Because if you didn't have that before, it was going to be kind of hard to see what we're doing. So now we're going to do UV unwrapping. This is where the magic of the Atlas texture method kind of comes in. It's this is because most of the time when you're UV unwrapping a 3D model, you actually have to do a pretty good amount of delicate work to make sure that you put seams on the character, you align them right, put them in islands and stuff, and some organization stuff. That could go all out the window here. So basically all we're going to do is we're going to go to the UV Unwrap tab on Blender. We're just going to select parts of the model that we want a particular color, hit U, unwrap, and then just throw them in the square that the color belongs to. So I'm going to show how that works right now. Go over to UV editing. If you don't see your texture here, just click this button on the far left here. It's like a little browse image be linked. Go to base. And even though we set up the preview on the other side, we don't have it here. So we got a couple options. We can go to that render preview like we had before. Or we can go click this one right here, which is material preview or solid. And then under the options here, there's one for texture. So we'll click that. You won't see anything yet, but click that.
Can you show the top again?
Yes. This one right this side right here. Yeah. So I clicked this solid here, and then I clicked down here texture. Yep, no problem.
I don't see that toolbar. Besides the line on.
Yeah. Your screen might be, actually what you can do, if you have a mouse with a mouse wheel, on your right panel of the UV here, just click your center click and then scroll to the right, you should be able to see If not, you can also shrink your left window here too.
And how did you get the atlas section to show up on the left panel?
Yes. So on the left panel, there's a button here, says browse image view links. Click that, and then just click your base that PNG.
I might have missed this set where you brought up that base.
Okay, no problem. In the shading tab, you, in the shading tab, when we remove the principal VSDF, you can do add texture, image texture, and then you would click open on the image texture itself, and you would just find the PNG, and then you just connect color surface here. Okay, no problem. Yep, I think I'll show how to unwrap the first one, and then we will stop for lunch. How's that sound? Yes. Can you hear me better now? Okay. All right. So to start the UV mapping process, once you have this configured, just go ahead, click the character, hit edit mode. And then we're going to use the L key here, which is going to be select linked. It's this little thing here. So like for hands, it's going to select all the geometry that is connected to itself. So do that for her two hands and then her face as well. So in this case with select linked, you don't actually need to use shift. Just doing it a couple of times will actually be cumulative. So you hover over this hand, hit L, then the next one, L, and yeah. You are correct in every other scenario. This one, it's just kind of works this way. Yes.
Does it work that way as because of the way that the model is set up?
A little bit, yes. So the linked here is, even though this is joined as one object, notice how, like, the model, if I did this and I did Shift H, that's like the head, right? So these parts are separated. So most of the parts are separated here. One trick of modeling, you actually don't need to join everything together. Like her skirt is a separate object from her torso, right? But they should be joined together here, so they use the same material, but they don't need to be joined in the actual geometry itself. Once you select the three, her head and her two hands, press the U key, and then you'll be given a menu like this. Depending on your version of Blender, it's gonna either have these separated out, or it's gonna just say unwrap. It really doesn't matter. None of these three options really matter to us. Just click angle based, and then once you have that, it will show the UV wrap on the left side here. What we're gonna do is on the left side, press the S key to scale, and scale it down real small, something like that. And then you'll press the G key, which is to move or grab, and just move it to the top left corner where the skin color is. And then you can just place it there. Now, if you go back into object mode, you'll see now that that part has the skin color. Everything else still remains. Yes?
One question is, how do you know how it influences the size of the unwrapping inside the texture, like with the scaling? Is there a difference if it is very big or very small? What does it do?
So funny enough is, as long as it's the same like dimension, like it's a square,
Yeah.
I can go to image here and I can do resize.
Yeah.
I can make this 4096 by 4096. And it'll still remain the same because this scales relative to your textures kind of.
It doesn't matter in terms of like, I guess in this case it's plain colors. You have like more like a painted thing.
If you have a painted one, the scaling also works the same way. It scales your UVs relative to the size of the map. So it will still be fine. It works that way here, but it also would work in a traditional map too. As long as you scale it like, actually, I think even if you scaled it externally, Blender still kind of treats it, it's not like an absolute coordinate, it's kind of more relative to the box. I'm gonna go back and,
And we update the advanced texture. Does it refresh automatically?
you can, hold on, what happened? Let's see. Okay, yeah, it's like not showing. I don't know if this is a bug or what's going on here, but I'll save this, Control F, reload, revert. And sometimes you might get like some visual bugs like that in Blender. If you do, this back, I can save this. And what I'll do is I'll also just, I'll leave it like this here. Any questions? All right. Raise your hand if you are able to map her skin color. Awesome. All right, so I think we're going to break for lunch here. Thank you all so far, and we'll be back. What time? Okay, no problem.
Lunch is technically for an hour, but if you guys want to bring stuff,
Yeah.
back with it.
Sounds good.
All the lunches in the meeting room, they're in these white bags, little go bag things, so.
Okay,
grab one. Sit.
nice.
So just this.
That was probably me.
espresso stuff in my brain, but I literally am saying the only like the one part I know. Espresso, yeah.
Hello, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Oh, fine. All right. A, B, C. All right.
Now you don't have to worry at all about the sound.
Yeah. Yeah, apologize for those in the back. That was,
I think I hit record.
Yeah, you did.
Now I go start.
Okay.
maybe give a few more minutes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could you show me how you connected the texture node to the material output?
Yes. Go here, and your shading tab here. Once you have the texture node, you could just click this little dot here, the color, and just drag it into the surface here, and that should work.
Okay. Yeah, my material object or output window is not there, so yes,
I think you can add it back. Let me see something. Yes, you can add it back.
Okay.
So if you use Shift A, search, material output, and then you get that one. Okay, and it does it so that you could select, that's funny. Yeah, sounds good. If you are interested, this is kind of what she would look like in Godot once we're done. This is this one's the one actually in my game file. So I did try to set up some spring bone simulations. I haven't really gotten it all done yet, but you get to kind of do that. I don't have a whole lot on my game yet. Been struggling to find the time and focus on it, but the idea of the game was actually like combat was going to be kind of like turn-based but free roaming in a sense, where like you would move around. Don't mind this model's like not. I haven't finished like this version of the model, but you would move around. And you would just kind of attack, and you could kind of do these combos. You build up. It's hard to see here. You build up these points at the bottom here, and then when you have enough, you can do your stronger attacks. That's just kind of how that's going to work. Eventually, you're going to be able to swap weapons and configure like what attacks you have as well. So it's kind of what, once it comes more together, they'll be able to see that, but been kind of pulling it apart lately, so.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it'll definitely make a lot more sense once I actually implement more stuff. I wanted to implement a couple of other characters as well, and there'll be some enemy logic, but I want to build the game to be kind of like a mix of turn-based and action RPG elements, so that way you still have the strategic element of turn-based, and you still have like that kind of engagement, so like you can still kind of do like combos and stuff.
Would there be like limited movement per turn, or like if you kind of roam?
Yeah, it's kind of like D&D in a sense that like you have a limited amount of movement. I actually don't have the UI showing, but if I did, the idea is that you have this stamina bar right here. Actually, it's going to be called energy, and moving a square costs 6 energy. So it benefits you to kind of like think about your movement as well as your attack pattern. Like, since she's a ranged character, she can kind of hit things from afar, but a lot of characters also have melee, so it's ranged attacks will be a lot weaker in balance. There are also like typically RPGs, there'll also be different like skills and modifiers that you use, so eventually you can kind of make crazy builds around like your the idea like eventually you can make it so like, yeah, you can only do a couple of attacks right now, but like as you scale, like eventually your combos could become a lot more sophisticated. And there's this color system, if you're familiar with like Fire Emblem's weapon triangle, there's like a color triangle in this game, where red beats green, green beats blue, blue beats red. So like if I hit this red one with a red weapon, but if I swap over to a blue enemy and I hit it with a red weapon, it does less damage. And green, wherever I have a green one, right there, it does more. Yeah, I also was able to do this thing where like you can select the enemy. Eventually this screen is like eventually the screen will have like all the information you need on the enemy that you're targeting, something like that. So it's kind of like that. And characters can also equip different weapon types, so she's not exclusive to the bow, but she will be like until you unlock the ability to get other weapons. So yeah, very much JRPG inspired. My favorite genre of games. It's let's see. Looks like we can get started here in a moment. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I spent many years like designing the game, but I've changed up so much and been struggling to like focus on things. I've been having some things in my life that have been tricky, so I'm hoping I could sort that out and start working on it more, but it's just been a little bit tricky. you know, how game developer things. Right. Looks like we got mostly everyone back. Yeah, I say we're good to start. Anybody who comes in later, I can catch them up. All we're really gonna do at this point is just finish the UV editing part that we started before. So all we really need to do is just basically map the rest of the colors to where we want them to be. So just like before, just select your model, and then since we did the skin color, now we'll just do some other parts. So I'll do her hair, use the L key to select length. And this, since she's got multiple hair strands, you might just have to take some time to select them all. She's also got these braids here, so do that. And then, okay, and you got the 3 bangs here, okay. Unwrap, scale that down, put it here, and then that's the hair. Her scarf and her little bow on the belt are all the same color, so I'll do that next. Oops. There we go. And then her jacket is all one color. This color right here. The shirt's white, so I'll just take that. Yep. Don't worry if you miss parts of it. You can always go back later. The skirt is blue. The pants are, I think it's this color. Oops. And this is, the boots are here. And then, let's see, the wings are white as well. And so you'll have most of it, but there will be some tweaks we'll have to make. Yeah, feel free to map just the rest of them. It doesn't have to be exactly the way I did mine. I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to map the other colors. And then we'll also go back and do our eyes and stuff. One of the bad things about 3D modeling is this is very terrifying. But for things like the eyes, actually, where's my, what was it? I don't have the numpad keys on the laptop, so, but you can go to orthographic view. And then you can do, like for the eyes, if you press the 3 key, you can go into face select mode. Might make it easier to select the things. There are some seams on the eyes, so when you press the L key, it should do it by the seams. If not, when you press the L key, this little sub menu should show up, and there should be a delimit option. And then you can do that by seam. actually going to just unwrap. Yeah, do the eyebrows. Go to do the eyelashes when it probably selected them when you originally wrapped the face. That's fine. It might be easier if you do it on face select, because if you do it on vertex select, it might select the whole thing. In that case, if you press the 3 key on your laptop, you'll do face select mode. Also this button up here. And that might make it a little easier to select what you want. Eyelashes. Don't forget the whites of her eyes as well. Do this. Yep. Goes actually darker to lighter, so.
Are you selecting faces?
Select faces, there's this button right here at the top, select mode is faces. You can also press the 3 key. This 1, 2, and 3 toggle between the different modes. So vertex 1, edge 2, face 3. You could still use the L key to select linked like we did before, and that'll still work as well.
So I'm seeing that the eyes are hollow in my model. Right? Like there is the cornea and behind is kind of that.
Yes, that is by design. So
Yeah.
why is this not, okay, here we go. Yeah, there's a, one thing I'd actually forgot to mention in the presentation is that with these stylized characters, you don't actually need to model the eye with a sphere. Due to the flat shading nature, you actually don't need to do that. You can actually model the eye kind of like a flat disc and then have like a hollow end as well. So it's kind of neither here nor there. It can save some geometry because then you don't have to worry about like the back of the eye kind of, or like the sphere part of the eye. And in here I also was just able to make cuts in it to make the different eye details. You might find that this will be done much more frequently on anime style models, but it's not always the case.
Can you show which colors you use for the eye?
Yes, so let me do that. Go back to ortho mode. So it might be easier to see if I do it this way. Here we go. So these parts, the top parts, are this third, the darkest color here.
Okay.
And it works its way kind of lighter. So
Yeah.
second, and then these at the bottom are the lightest ones.
Okay.
And then the rims in the middle are basically, I think this rim and this rim are the lightest color as well, or second lightest. And then I think this is just black, or it might be actually these. These are darkest, yeah. So you get something like that, yeah. And I forgot her ears as well. Her ears are skin color. One other thing I could show you as well is you don't have to necessarily adhere to where the seams are or the model breaks are. You can you just select like, you wanted to select like a couple of lines here. You could change the color of that, something like you give her like a little, you know, decal, or you could do the same thing kind of over here where, and then you can basically see there's actually some seams here on the boot, so you can make this part white as well, so on and so forth. And then the very bottoms you can get and move those to some other color. I don't know, you have a little bit of freedom there. What you might see is that there's these little red lines. Those are called seams. And I know I say you don't necessarily need seams here, but it can be helpful while you're doing this process, just because like then you can logically separate the parts that you want different colors. The seams, usually you go into edge select mode and you use like shift select, or sorry, not shift select, like alt select, and you can select a line of edges like this. And you can do U, mark seam, and then when you use the L key to select, and you have seam as your delimiter, then it will select only that portion of it. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you might find like with the 3D modeling process, you might like to use the seams as a tool. But that one I'm not going to use. I just wanted to illustrate that here. Also notice that you'll also notice that there are cuts in the geometry like this. I know it kind of breaks some topology practices, but given also the way we shade and stuff, it's like not that big of a deal. And this is high poly enough, so it's not going to really be a problem. In that case, you can see kind of where I have the lips. You can, this probably should have been a seam. Free to do that part too if you wanted.
Is that how you can do the mean selection that works?
Which one?
With the seams?
Yeah, with the select linked and you delimit seam, yeah, that's how that's how that works. That's only if you do L and then you do seam as your delimit here. Now I have that. I can move that over to color her lip. If it's not really selecting everything correctly, you might find that you need to put a seam somewhere else, like here, like I didn't connect this seam here. Let me connect this one. Mark seam, do the same thing here. Oh, still missing one somewhere. Oh.
And then you can select link.
Yes, once you have the full seams. Okay, yeah, this is.
How do you mark it as a seam?
Once you have your loop selected, press the U key for the UV menu, and then there should be a mark seam option.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yep.
That's how you prepare the model to be selected.
Yes. I did forget to do the lips though. Don't worry about the lips too much. She has an upper lip and a lower lip. But yeah. There's some things you can do in that case. Raise your hand if you feel like you sufficiently colored your model. All right, you guys ready to move on to the next step? Cool. All right. Now we can start building the toon shader. So unfortunately, oh, sorry. Somebody say anything? Sorry, I thought I heard something. Maybe it was a microphone echo. Anyway, so unfortunately, one of the caveats to this process, well, I think just in general, is that because Blender and Godot do their shaders differently, you can't just build it in Blender and export to Godot. We'll have to build it in both. I guess you don't necessarily need to build it in Blender as if you were to just continually export to Godot, but I think it's very beneficial to do it in both places. That way, when you're working on your model, you can also see what you're actually working on. So it won't take too long. Once you understand how the shader works in Blender, making it work in Godot is actually not too much different. So we will still build it in Blender, and then we will build it in Godot once we get to that point as well. So basically what we're going to do is make that hard shadow, and we're going to do a little bit of tricks as well. I'll walk you through this, so don't worry there. I did want to give some special attention to the color ramp node, which is this node right here. This is kind of where the magic happens. In Blender, this node basically takes the input color and it maps it to a range of values based on what you specify. So it's kind of like a black to white kind of gradient. Typically, this would be like a perfect black to white gradient, but you could specify this as a constant type, and this allows you to make kind of that hard shadow. So it's going to say like, oh, if your character shading in this spot is like 80% shadow, this kind of tells it's 100% shadow, right? Versus it's 100% lit. So it's where the magic will basically happen. And then there's some work we'll do to connect everything together. So we'll go here and we'll go back into Blender and we'll start building the shader. So once you have your character, go ahead and go back to the shading tab. And yours might look like this, where it's basically just a blob, there's no shadows or anything like that. Does this look like everybody have something that looks like this right now? Okay, cool. So now what we'll do, we'll go ahead and add a couple of nodes to start the toon shader. So, excuse me. So you press Shift A, and we're going to do diffuse BSDF. So earlier, we had that principal BSDF. We don't really need that because that's too complicated. This is just a very basic base shader that we can use. It's going to do, it says Lambertian. It's basically just kind of a dot product between lights and normals on a 3D model. Just think of it as a very basic lighting algorithm. It's just, it's all we really need to get started with this one here. Once you do that, we have to convert it into color data so that we can work with the color ramp. So there's a shader to RGB node. And then once you add that, you can just put the BSDF in there. And what you can do also is just attach this to the surface material output. So while you're working, you can kind of see how this gets put together. Shift A again, and then add your color ramp. Once you have your color ramp, select the constant interpolation. And you notice that now your model shading changes. You could play around with this slider here, and you can change kind of the influence the light has on it. So like, I usually put it around 0.2, but you can do whatever floats your boat. It's that constant that kind of makes that, see the black and white shadow. let me know if everyone was okay getting to this part of the. Good. All right. So now that we have the color ramp in place, we have to actually blend the colors together from our base colors. So this is not going to be super useful to us right now when it's not showing the actual colors that we want. So the way we can do that is we can use a mix color node. It might be called mix RGB depending on which version of Blender you have. But this mix color node, then you're going to have your base texture here. Plug it into A or B. I guess it doesn't really matter as much. Your color ramp is not going to go into B. It's going to go into factor, because that's going to indicate if the parts that are shaded are going to use color A, basically, and the parts that are lit are going to use color B. Or it's backwards, right? I think I have it backwards. So in this case, I want color B to be the lit color, and color A to be the shaded color. So color A, I could just go and make it black, and you can kind of see how now we have our base color attached to it. Go ahead. I'll split this view away to make this a little bit easier.
What is the node called that connects to B?
Connects here. This is the mix color node.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. How are we all feeling?
Need just like a little more time.
Yeah, no problem. Sounds good. A couple more minutes and then we're good to go. See where we're at next.
Can you explain, do you know why we need to use these shaders for RGB?
Let me see. I don't think, yeah, it's just because Blender cannot convert from this type, this BSDF type, which is kind of like shader plus like some other information, to the factor here. It just doesn't work.
Yeah,
But this does.
yeah.
The color data is essentially just like a vector of RGB, but it also can convert to a scalar, which is this factor here. So it does still work once we plug that in. Anybody still need more time? I'll keep going, but I can circle back if needed, no worries. I just don't want to rush anybody, but I do want to get through as well, so no worries. So the next part is enhancing the shadows. So all I'm really doing here is just giving you a way to make the shadows use the base color. There are a couple approaches you could use to do this. You could create another base texture like we had done before, and then just kind of label it as your shadows, and then you could just pick the colors you want to use there. Or you can also just do it algorithmically, which like I did here. Now this isn't perfect, but this was just because I was lazy. I just did the HSV conversion here. So we'll just do this. I can show you how it works, and we could go from there. To show you how that works, just gonna add a HSV node and place that here. You still want your base color to itself to be attached to B. We'll attach the shadow to A. But basically, give me one sec. Yeah. And then with the HSV, you can plug this into the A. And right now the colors should be basically identical. But you could change these numbers here. The saturation, I think it made 2. And then value is like 0.8. You can play around with the values, 0.5. See, now you can have darker shadows and stuff like that. So this way it still kind of takes the color into account when you make the shadows. Just a quick way to do it. I think in my final product, I'll probably make the shadows fixed colors. I'll actually manually do them, but this is quick and easy, gets the job done for now. Yeah, and this just plugs into the shadow part with the HSV plugs to A, and the base plugs into B. Anybody would like more time or has any questions? Are you guys okay back there? All right, cool, awesome, thank you. All right, cool, so now we're gonna look at so now what we have is effectively we have all the base colors and the shadows, but another important aspect of making 3D look 2D is the outline, right? So it can kind of turn your character from just kind of like the base shading to something a little bit more dynamic. Outlines in video games can be done with a number of methods, but the one that's the most common you might hear in your travels is something called the inverted hull method. And all really inverted hull is it takes your entire model, duplicates it, it scales it up a little bit, and then flips the normals. And then you can make that part of the model your outline color. And that basically effectively creates the outlines for you. It's not a perfect method, as you'll see in a little bit, but we'll work with it. Other options, sometimes there's like stencil shaders that are used in games. I know Godot, I think, still working on doing a stencil implementation. So this is the method I went because this was the one I was able to get working in both. It's also the quickest one to get up and running. Do keep in mind that this doubles your polygon count. So if you're being very careful about your total vertex face count, triangle count, that is something to keep in mind. But it should still be pretty okay for the most part. So let's go ahead and talk about how to actually implement the outline. Actually, you know what? There's another slide. Sorry. This is going to be a little bit different from Blender to Godot. I'll go over the Godot implementation once we get there. But essentially in Blender, we're going to use what's called the solidify modifier, which does exactly what I explained before, which is basically just duplicates your mesh, scales it up a little bit, and then flips the normals. This, and then along with creating a second material that we can use specifically for the outline will let us get the outline that we desire. So I'll walk through that now. So we'll go back to the layout view, whatever is easiest. Here, I think I had to do this. All right, there we go. Select your character, go to the Material tab here, and then hit the plus button, create a second material. And then the new button as well. Call this one Outline. The outline surface right here, you can just change it directly here. We're going to use where is it? It's emission. So it's just a solid color. So diffuse is like still showed your algorithm, emission's more of a solid color. And you can just change this color to a black. We will use this in a moment here. Once you have this set up, make sure it's in the second spot too. So the base is first and the outline second. Next, we'll go over where the little wrench is in the modifiers tab. Click Add Modifier, and then we'll look for Solidify. The Solidify modifier here is going to look very weird, right, once you get it initially. First, we're going to actually flip the offset to 1. And then you're going to change the thickness a little bit. Change it to a smaller value, like 0.003 is the one I usually use. Under the normals, there's going to be an option called Flip. So we'll flip those normals. And then in the material section, there should be a material offset. Move that to 1. And then you'll see that now it took the second material. There is one little problem with this though, is that it basically is covering our model. So to fix that, go back to your outline material. There should be a setting somewhere under backface culling. Should be camera. Select that. I guess you could select shadow too, but it doesn't really seem to make a difference. And then your outline should be there. raise your hand if you need time, more time. Okay, no problem. We'll talk about the next section, but don't worry if you still are still working. We'll circle back. So you may have noticed once you put the outline together, it kind of looked really bad around the face, right? In some other areas. So that's one of the challenges with the inverted hole method. However, you can control the weight of the outline some. And it's actually not too shabby. We can use the weight paint tool that's in Blender, and we can do some work to change the outline kind of weights around where we want it to be. So what we can do is create a vertex group for the outline. Then we'll enter weight paint mode, and we'll just adjust some of the weights around the face and some other areas that you might want to adjust. So we'll go back to that. So to do that, first select your character again. There should be like a little diamond here, this data tab. Then vertex groups, and then create a new one. We can call it outline. Next, go back to the solidify modifier. Under vertex group, select the outline group and assign it. Now, go once you have your character selected, go up here to top left and then enter weight paint mode. You'll see something like this, which will make it very hard to see what the outlines are. But you can go to this widget right here. If you hover, it just says weight paint. And then if you move the opacity down, you can, that should allow you to at least kind of see the outlines on top of it as well. So you could see how the outline, you can see the weight paints, but you could also see the outlines a little more clearly here, whereas you can't really see it before. Notice how that changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit tab again and go into edit mode. Just select everything. Go to the data, outline, just hit weight 1 and assign, just so everything is at one weight. Yeah, sure, no problem. So once you're in weight paint mode and you set up this overlay, hit tab, go back to edit mode, go back to the vertex group outline. We're just going to assign all the weights to 1. So select all on your object. You can use the A key to do that. So A, And then weight is 1, assign. That way we have a consistent base. And then you can go back to weight paint mode. And then now you could say, okay, say like, you could turn on mirroring if you want to do that. With the weight paint mode, you paint your basic color, hold shift, you can do smoothing, and I think it's like control for the opposite. So I could paint 0 weights if I hold control and then paint that here. I'm just going to correct where I missed. Like for example, like the tips of the hair will probably be 0 weight. Do the same thing kind of right here. Yeah, you might make a little bit of mistakes here, but don't worry too much. I would do like the hair tips first. And then we'll get to the head separately. The braids I also like to paint, maybe not 0, but I will paint them to like 0.3 or something. And just kind of paint around there. Just kind of repeat the process. And then you could kind of use a little bit of stylization too. Like if you want the wings to be a smaller weight, you could do that as well. Parts that are a little bit kind of blending in, you could just adjust the weights there, kind of like where this intersects. There's also right here, kind of like where the legs meet the boot. You can also paint that there. So imperfections are totally fine. As a matter of fact, it's kind of paramount to the style. So like if you make some mistakes, it's like not a big deal. Then once you're done with that, go to edit mode again, and we can adjust the rest of the paints that we want to get. So for the head, it's just going to be a lot easier here. It's hard to kind of see the vertices, so you might have to so let's say for the head, I'm just going to select the whole head. I'm not going to worry about the seams right here. Select the whole head, select the eyes. You may have to also, if you're having trouble seeing, turn off, go to the solidify modifier where it says edit mode, turn that off so you can see what you got. Yeah, we'll just select the whole head. Go ahead and go to where your outline is. Set it to some number like let's just say 0.3, and then assign. And then for the eyes, the eyelashes, and the whites of the eyes. Make sure it's set. Assign the weight to 0. And then you could use that as well to check your results too. So that helps to make it, the outline look a bit better when you're working there. You notice there might still be a little clipping with the lips. So the way you fix that is inside there's like a little mouth bag here. Go ahead and select this and assign that 0 weights as well. And then you might have to expand that a little bit too. I think Control Plus. Actually, not sure what the shortcut is on the Mac. But you could do select, more, Command Numpad Plus. Okay. You could just do. There's no numpad. Select more. You just and then you just do it, assign to 0. And then that makes it a little bit easier, right? The last step you can do from here is go back to weight paint mode. And now you can go to weights, smooth, and you can give it a few iterations just to make it make the lines blend in a little bit better. And that's how you would basically go about doing the outline weight. So now the face looks a little bit easier to read because the outlines aren't so thick. The eyes don't have like any problems there. And that's how you would do that. Just for the sake of time, we won't weight paint the entire thing, but I did just want to at least illustrate kind of how you would do that. So if you feel comfortable with the steps, let me know. Does anybody need any more time?
How do you get it to show the like colors in for text paint mode?
Okay, so in weight paint, it was actually weight paint mode.
Oh, wait, paint.
There's a little widget up here that says weight paint, and then there's an opacity. If the opacity is full, then you only see the colors, but it makes it hard to see the outlines. So I moved this all the way to 0, so you can still kind of see the outlines now. But it still overlays the red and blue weights.
Oh, okay.
Yep, no problem. All right. Yeah. I apologize. I just had to go through a couple more things. Hate to rush anybody, but I do want to try to at least get to Godot. Once we do that, we've done the weight painting. The next thing I just want to show real quick is normal editing. One of the other hallmarks of the anime style is the way the face shades. If you look right now, our faces kind of has some weird shading around the lips and the nose and stuff like that. What you can do is you can do something pretty simple to make the normal edit at the bottom. So like, there's a couple ways to do it. You can manually edit normals. There's like other methods that other YouTubers use, which are probably better. But the problem is they take a bit longer. So I'm going to show you a pretty quick and dirty method to do this. It's probably not the best method just for the results you get, but it is quick. And then the way it will work is we'll use Blender's data transfer modifier, and that would be a way to affect that. So the way this works is you would actually create a circle, not a circle, you do a sphere. It could be a UV sphere. And then click shade smooth, and then in edit mode, you'll see this makes sense in a moment. You're gonna bring it up and kind of get it roughly to the size of her head. Where you want it to be. Somewhere around there. Once you have that, on the sphere itself, you'll go to where this is Object tab, Visibility. Oh wait, why is it this one? This looks different. Viewport display, here we go. Display as wire. Okay. And what you're going to do, then click your character, add modifier, data transfer. And then you're going to source is going to be your sphere. The face corner data, and then custom normals. So now it's like you get something like this. And under here, you'll use the nearest face interpolated method. And then what you can do is you can go into edit mode and just scale the sphere in a little bit, scale it up, move it a little bit, scale it. And so you get something that kind of looks right. And then you'd want to then also do a subdivision on the sphere just to get slightly better normals. So like this is kind of like how you would do that. Yeah, this. No, you're good. So the sphere would be Shift A.
Yes.
Yep, mesh, UV sphere. So, yeah, I apologize. I realize that this is probably not the best step to show right here, but this was just like one way you can do the normal editing. What I'm going to do is let's go ahead and skip a little bit ahead. I just like to see if we can get into Godot. I don't want to. Yeah, I apologize that it's kind of the way the timing works, but we'll do what we can. There are going to be some more tools on the normal editing line outside of this, so but this is just kind of like an example of what you can do. So I'm just going to hide this for now. So let's take a look. So if you want more information on how to do this, and I don't mean the shameless plug, but I think it's just the easiest way. So I do have a video on my channel. It's called the Complete Character Guide. There's also an online article, so they will go into detail on how you can do the face normals, as well as some of the things that are next here. So there's also the aspect of the custom shadows. I think what we'll do here is we'll skip this part as well, and we'll go to exporting for Godot. Talk about that real quick. So now we need to actually get our character into Godot. There's a couple ways you could do that. You could use the Blender import mechanism that Godot has, or you can export it to FBX or GLTF format. I personally don't use the Blender importer, even though it's pretty nice. I like to export it to GLTF because I can control which objects actually show up in Godot. Sometimes I might have temporary stuff. It just gives me a little bit more control of where I want things to go. So I'm going to show you how to export to GLTF in this particular case. I will probably mess around with the blend file import more on my own, but if you find that works great for you, that's also great. But I'll just show you the GLTF method. But we're going to prepare the model real quick. So there's going to be a little bit about how you can use vertex paint to store data. We will still touch this part because I think we can do this real quick. Because one thing we'll do with the Godot shader is we want to also put the outline. One of the challenges with exporting the model out of Blender into Godot is that we don't actually want to apply the modifiers when we export, because I don't want to actually export the solidify modifier. There's challenges, you can do that, but it does raise some other challenges. There's, for example, if you ever wanted to do anything with shape keys, like face animations or anything in the future, the applied modifiers will not work. So instead, what we will do is we'll keep the solidified modifier on our model in Blender, but we won't apply the modifiers. Instead, we'll just export the model as is, but we'll also store the outline weights we just did into our vertex paints, vertex colors. Vertex colors are just something that come free with the model, and you can use them in any shader. You can use them in Blender shader, you can use them in Godot, and it's just a really good way to store additional information on your character model that you can feed to your shaders. Guilty Gear developers, Arc System Works, actually use the vertex paint and they split them into multiple channels. So a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. And you can store different types of data on them. So we're going to store outline weights on one of the channels. But you could also, use other data to like control like specular, for example, like how anime characters have like on their hair. Like if you wanted to do some details like that. You can control like custom shadows, which is one thing I'll skip here, but something we could have also store on those channels. And then when you write your shader in Godot, you just split the color. There's going to be a node that we can use to split the color into the RG and B channels, and you can use that accordingly. So it's a really cool technique you can use to just like give your shaders a bit more like information to work with. So there is an add-on called Vertex Color Master, which lets you do the splitting. What we'll do instead is we'll just take our weight paint that we have for the outline, convert it to the vertex paints, and then we'll just export that. So we'll use just the one channel for the vertex paint for our outlines. So just due to the time constraint. So if we go back here on our character, you're going to click Vertex Paint mode in the top left corner. And you're not going to see anything because it's on the render view. Go back to the solid view. And then there should be an change to viewport shading setting. Should be attribute. And now, like, if you painted vertex colors, like, you could see it. What you're going to do to get the weight paints from our character that we did before, you select this outline vertex group in the outline editor here. And then while you're in vertex paint mode, there's going to be an option under paint, vertex color from weight. Just like that, and now it applies the weight paint to the vertex colors. So this is a very cool way to use the work we just did to apply that data. And once you're done with that, we will export it. Just to show you the, apologize. What we'll do is we'll open up, I'll explain this real quick, just what the export settings look like. We talked about GLTF. And then what I'll do is I'll ask you all to open the last folder, I think it's number 9, and we'll just walk through kind of the rest of that. And I'll just kind of demo it, and that way you can still see what the final result looks like. I'll put the slides as well on the GitHub after this, so don't worry too much if you're missing this here. But for the most part, exporting it is pretty straightforward. You would just go to File, Export GLTF, and there are a few settings you can do. You could do visible objects is a limit to. The transform, the data here, a lot of stuff is default, just don't apply the modifiers like we discussed before. Material, we actually will set the material to no export because we will create the material separately in Godot. The shape keys, we don't have any, but you can leave that. Same with armature, animation, we don't have any of that stuff. And then you would just export the GLTF file, and that's how you would do it. Those export settings are available on the slides as well as the video I mentioned before, and the online companion link. What I'm going to do is go to here. Yeah, I'm doing that right now.
Is there a particular version of Godot we should be on?
I'm doing this in 4.4. This should all work as long as you're like 4.2 and higher. Should be fine. I think 4.4 actually gives you a couple more settings in the visual shader. So I chose to use the visual shader over the shader code just because it makes it easier to convert from Blender to Godot. So it's very similar formats. But you could hypothetically write this all in code, shader code too, if you wanted to. So like once you get your model imported, you would get the settings like this. Like if you double click the GLB file, I just keep everything the same. And then I just right click and do new inherited scene, and that's kind of where you get something like this. And then to start configuring a shader, I just did a material override under geometry. And then just create a new material there. Okay, wait. What the heck? All right, sorry. There we go. Yeah, so you would, once you have the model imported, you would go to surface material override and you would do a new, you do a new shader material. And then under that, shader is going to be a new shader. I already have it, so it's the toon shader in here. Toon that, it's a visual shader. And then just to go through the toon shader itself. So unlike Blender, Godot splits up your shader into three kind of types. There's vertex, fragment, and light. The vertex shader is first. That allows you to transform the vertices on the model through the shader. We'll use that for the outline, but it's not used for the actual toon shader. The fragment shader is used to determine the color of the model. So here there's basically two portions. There's the texture itself. This is where we would put our base texture. You have to convert it to a sampler port in order to use it, a texture parameter. So I just created a parameter to make it easier for us. This albedo, which is just basically your base color. And then you can just put that in here. And then also, if you notice up here, okay, this is where the custom shadows would have been. In shaders, there's this varyings concept. This allows you to pass data from one of these to the next one. So in a fragment shader, fragment has access to this color data. So you would set the varying here, and then you could pass this to light later on. So you use it kind of like a variable. And then in the light shader, we basically kind of replicated what we did in Blender here. So there's the diffuse shader, so that diffuse BSDF is essentially the same as saying take a dot product between the model's normals, which are just like the little perpendicular things that you don't see here, but they kind of face the perpendicular to the vertices on your model. And then the light. So the light direction is kind of like, in this case, like this. So it takes those two vectors, dot products them, and then you would get your diffuse BSDF. So this is part with the custom shadow. This is really, if you omit the custom shadows, it's kind of just like here. Then I basically, to do the color ramp, there's no color ramp node in the Godot shader, but you can effectively do the same thing through this smooth step. Smooth step is a way to say, scale it from like this value to this value. And if you keep the numbers pretty low, it will basically create that hard shadow. So this 0.1. And then this, for some reason on the Mac, doesn't work if I do both 0.1, 0.1. But if I do just a slightly higher number, it'll work fine. And then after that, do the same thing with the shadow colors, where how we did it in Blender. How we have this hue saturation value conversion here. And then it takes a little bit more steps in Godot because you have to, there's no HSV function like Blender has. Instead, you have to convert it to a vector that represents HSV. So that's what I did. Take the albedo color, which is the base color, convert it, and then just do the same kind of math on it, and then convert it back. And then you can mix the two vectors together. It's like the mix RGB color node. And then that goes your output, and that's just how you make the toon shader. To do the outline shader, you would use the next pass here because you can't really combine the two together into one. So the next pass here allows you to render on top of what you have. And you can use this to kind of build your materials as you want them to be. So we'll render the outline on top of it. So next pass, it's just going to be a new shader material. And the shader is going to be this outline shader right here. And then there's some parameters here. One thing to keep in mind for the outline shader is that the shader itself needs to have a couple of settings changed. There's this cull here, which is like how we did the backface culling in Blender for the outline. We do the same thing in Godot, but it's flipped the other way around. They treat it as front in this case. And then I just also make sure it's unshaded and there's no shadows coming in for the outline because we don't need to do any of that for the outline. The outline itself is a very simple vertex shader that has basically does the same thing the Solidify does in the sense that you're going to take your normals and then you're going to add. So you have this vertex input, which is just where every vertex is on your model. And then you're going to do your normals times some sort of numerical value, and then add that to the vertex to basically create that outer shell. And then there's also the aspect here where we apply the outline weights, which was from the vertex color, which is this color node here. Not to be confused with albedo. Albedo was the base texture color. This color is the vertex color, which is what we transformed the from the weight paints over. And then this is just to do a little bit of shader math to take this outline size that we have and multiply it by the vertex colors that we have. So the parts that are less outlines, you can tell are still less outlined. So wow, okay. See, like the face has less outline, whereas the hair has more, etc. And then lastly, there's just a way to control the outline color here. We just add a parameter. So I can go in here and make the outline color something different, like red. I can make the outline larger. I can make it smaller. And so on and so forth. So I apologize for having to speed through that last part, but that's more or less what the workshop would be. It's just getting to basically some things you would change on your model in Blender, and then how you just configure the shaders in Godot. There's so much more I'd love to talk to you about, but just due to the time constraints, maybe, who knows, maybe another time, we'll see. So any questions or anything? Yes.
Something I've struggled with, which you know you had to do right here, was basically duplicating your work, having to create the shader in Blender.
Yeah.
Redoing it in Godot. Have you heard anything about development on the Blender side to possibly use that?
I have.
I know there was some workflow stuff coming down, but I wasn't sure if it. Yeah, sorry, kind of a loaded question.
No, you're good. I have not heard of anything per se, but I also haven't actively looked either. I kind of just thought the reason why that's the case is just because they use very different shading languages. Like I mean, Godot uses Vulkan now, but like back even when it was OpenGL, they still have very different layers on top of that, and they're just very different. Like, you notice Blender doesn't have the vertex fragment light kind of breakdown. Blender just kind of does it all together, whereas Godot doesn't. I think this is even the case for like if you were to use Unity or Unreal. I don't think you could just do a straight export of your shader. I think it's just always going to be a limitation, unless someone's able to write a program that's very intelligent and is able to map the nodes together. I think this might just still be kind of the case for a while. The good thing here is that at least is once you kind of have your toon shader defined, it's like you kind of do one and done for the most part.
It doesn't look like it was too hard to do the conversion with the visual shader.
No, and they have enhanced the visual shaders quite a bit, and I think the last recent versions of Godot. So there was some stuff missing before, but now it's got a lot more I can work with. And the hardest part was really kind of seeing like how you do the color ramp. But once you know it's just a smooth step, really, it's much easier. I wanted to try to mess with a way to make it so that you can make like a color ramp like node in Godot, but it doesn't really exist. That way, like if you had a more sophisticated color ramp in your Blender shader, like with multiple layers of colors, that you still could do it here. The way I did it in my game itself is, I don't think I actually have this. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, the shader itself has the color ramp, because in my game I actually split the color ramp into basically 3 instead of a black and white, so there was like a gray tone in the middle. So the way I was able to combine that was to basically split it into 2 smooth steps and then mix them together kind of even weight. So like this was like the hard edge and this was the soft edge or something like that. So that was the way I ended up doing that. So you have to get a little bit creative here. I think might have to put in like a feature request or something to make a color ramp node in Godot. Hopefully we'll see that happen one day.
Yeah, you just made it right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, apologize for the time constraints, but I thank you all so much for coming to the workshop. Oh, I will get you. Sorry, one question in the back?
Yeah, just real quick. So I was playing with Godot's newer compositor effect system for doing like post-processing on the whole image.
Oh, cool.
So I was just curious what you thought about like that sort of workflow, where it's like, you do cell shading on the entire image or like outlines versus just doing like this per character or even like a combination of the two? Just like your general thoughts on that.
Yeah, I haven't messed with that newer feature. I actually didn't even know exists, but I know there was like some things you could do with like viewport nodes that.
So it totally bypasses that. You don't have to do that trick.
That's nice. Yeah, so I'll have to look into that. I think the outlines will still largely be the inverted hole because if I could get access to a stencil buffer, that could be really good. Because you know how like you select an object in Blender and it makes this orange outline? That's what the stencil buffer can kind of do. So if I do have access to that, that could still be very useful. The only problem is that it doesn't go inside either, so it doesn't really account for the whole thing as the inverted hole would. So I think it's good to play around with the tool, but it may not necessarily get the outcome that you achieve. Although I still think I would use the stencil buffer for other reasons.
Definitely.
Yep, anyway, thank you all so much. Last thing I'll share with you. So here's just, I'll put the whole thing on here. It'll be in the resource files. But yeah, I have that 1.5 hour long YouTube video. I talk about some of the stuff that I just didn't get to in the workshop, unfortunately. There's also an online version of the guide. I didn't get all the pictures in there, but the text is in there. You can follow along with the video if it helps you, if you prefer that way. Also, Kyla is available as a 3D model. You can download the model. It is under a license, though, because I do plan to use her in my game when I make it one day. But feel free to play around with it for educational purposes. Also, lots of YouTubers. There's a bigger list on my page, but just a few that were really helpful in learning how to do all this. Obviously, Arc System Works Talk was excellent, but Real Skies is really good for learning Blender. 2AM is a specific YouTuber. He does like anime style as well. And Raymond Cripps is developing a game of his own with an anime style aesthetic, which he also broke down the GDC talk really well. So some examples, some really good YouTubers. There's more on the list as well. And then my socials. All right, thank you all so much.